wants to use like photos on marketing stuff, and I'm like, I'm not being in a photo.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously we're here to talk about funding and investment. Very briefly, if you're expecting Ella Romanos as our host, I'm not her. She's over there, so you still get Ella. I'm Will Freeman, games journalist, copywriter, editor, etc. in Games, Guardian and Edge and so on. Just to explain, obviously we've had to shift things around a bit. I'm here last minute. When I'm looking at my phone, I'm not playing What the Car or anything. It's where I've got the questions because it's been a bit of a scramble. But we are very, very well prepared, and we've got three amazing experts to talk about this. Hopefully you'll be able to kind of walk away with some kind of really meaningful advice that can help your studio or game or next project. So let's do the introductions. I'm going to let them introduce themselves properly because you're going to hear, this is my second time on this stage this week. You're going to hear too much my voice. So to the left of me, Cassia Curran Games Agency, business consultation for indie games, doing some really amazing work. Then Ella Romanos, I'm sure many of you know Ella, CEO of Fundamentally Games. I'm not going to lie, Ella does so many different things. I had to go, Ella, what one should I actually introduce you as? Because do you need to say no to a few more gigs, do you feel, Ella? Yeah. And then on the end, Pamina Bow, head of corporate dev at the brilliant Dream Reality Interactive. So let's break the ice and make everyone feel welcome with a round of applause. So, I mean, yeah, between the three of you, you've done so much. I feel we could talk about just this alone. But just briefly, a quick intro, I guess, to kind of your time in the games industry. And, you know, if you want to touch on kind of your time with games. So, Cassie, you're nearest, so you get thrown this one first.
Cool. All right. Well, I started off in the games industry as investor relations manager, and then in business development at NetEase, which is one of the biggest internet games companies in China, and did things like M&A sourcing, looking for game studios to invest in. Then head of business development, Jagex, amongst other things, again, M&A sourcing, right, looking for studios to invest in or acquire. And then ran Wings, set up and ran Wings. Yeah. Which, like, this is all reminding you of like
I've been doing the same
Wings,
thing for 18 years.
Awesome microfund that invests in games made by women and marginalized genders as a project finance fund. And now I run my own agency where I'm living my best life, helping indie game studios, particularly in the VR and MR space. With business development, business strategy. I'm also an angel investor, and I also advise a few games funds as well.
I think we can agree Cassie is suitable for the topic of the panel there. Well, honestly, mate, that is amazing. You literally had the same job title for 18 years. So incredible. Ella, you've just done one thing like me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No, great to hear.
I'm a programmer originally, did not start in finance, but I had a work for hire studio that I started as a graduate. Realized at some point I had to do business, or someone had to. That ended up being me, accidentally. Obviously raised money with that company, and that sort of evolved into helping other indie developers. When I moved on from that, I started doing consulting and actually ended up working with quite a lot of investment funds, helping them to sort of assess, oversee, and then manage projects or companies they'd invested in. Mm-hmm. And I also ran a loan fund for VGTR financing. So I worked with a lot of developers to help them raise money, both project, grant. I ran a grant. There's too many things on it. And ran a company helping them to apply for Innovate UK grants. So I've kind of covered grants, equity, project financing. Now I run a publisher. So now we publish live service games, and obviously that includes funding. But we obviously have raised money ourselves, and I still advise and help a lot of developers in sort of funding areas.
Say it. Pamina.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. And obviously, super experienced people in the game sector. I come originally from the finance background, so PE, VC, family office investing. Prior to games, I've been in games for about 3 years, working as investor relations for Dream Reality, which is an indie game based here in London. And in addition to that, I work for a fund with 2 strategies around credit and equity. So that's really exciting. I sort of wear 2 hats at the same time and very schizophrenic. But hopefully that adds to the panel discussion.
Amazing. Despite my joke earlier about it being last minute, my role on stage, as you can see, some very perfect expert. So let's dive in. And like one of the challenges, even coming up with the questions, is there's so many different coming up with the questions. They gave me the questions and I put them in an order. But like working on the questions, there's so many manifestations almost of what a game can be, what a game studio can be, right? It's amazing the breadth of what games as an industry and as a medium are. So I feel slightly almost daft asking this first question, but like what ultimately is an investor or other type of financier looking for in a studio or game? Is it the studio? Is it where to start with that one? I mean, this could be the whole thing, but Ellie, you're looking at Cassia.
Well, I can start. I think there is some commonalities across everything, and actually what it really comes down to is the team. And I think whatever type of funding you're going for, the team is a lot of the thing in all cases. Is that fair?
Yeah, it depends. I think with equity investment, it's all about the team, and the project is less important. If it's project finance, then you definitely focus on the project, but the team, you have to believe that the team can actually make that project happen. So it's also still very important.
Yeah, I think it's all about that trust. You know, like if you've got a team who have had loads of commercial experience, then the trust is almost just there by default, right? And you might even be able to just get money based on a pitch deck.
Yes.
But if you haven't got that commercial experience, then it's a question of, okay, well, how do I build that trust that we as a team can deliver this amazing thing? So firstly, you've got to show more of what you're going to be making and that you can do it, but also build that trust that you are the people to do this amazing thing, because ultimately ideas are great, but it's all about execution and it's all about the people who do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question actually, because there's probably been a systemic shift around being a specialist in a particular medium prior. We're mobile experts. We've built mobile games for the last 10 years. Here's the next mobile game. You know, that kind of rhetoric has shifted a bit to now cross-platform and being able to deliver cross-platform and really keeping a pace with the ever-changing dynamic of new technologies arising. And I think games as an industry, and I say that having been in non-gaming before, is a very fast pace. And it's kind of a cliche, but it's a very, very fast evolving space. And you're constantly having new technologies and tools that you can leverage. So I think that absolutely team is kind of a baseline that all kinds of investment strategies will look to. But just digging into that a little bit more, I guess if you are able to showcase your team as a team that is experienced, but that is agile, and also importantly, like knowing what you don't know, because technology is ever evolving. If you know what you don't know and you are able to backfill, which I think plays into network, you know, those are the sort of things that will bring comfort to an investor in an ever-changing landscape. So I concur with you guys. I guess I'm just adding a little bit more to say, yeah, what does that actually mean? It means agility. It means knowing your faults and being able to find solution for those skills you might not have because the tech is so fast evolving.
But having said, I'm always a little bit skeptical of studios that are like tracing trends a little bit too hard. Like last year they were doing blockchain, this year they're doing AI, and I'm just like, you know, like you haven't really backed it up, right? So you haven't really positioned. You don't have. I think it feels very shallow when it's just pure trend chasing. I will need to see something like they've been working on AI for X number of years, or someone in their team has that kind of in-depth AI experience to really believe that actually this is the new focus.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of, to your point, I agree. Like it's sort of like if you're changing a few words on your pitch deck, then it feels quite shallow. But if you have a very experienced team that has seen the last 20 years in games and are able to, or have the experience across different tech, and are able to kind of have that bird's eye view and bring those skill sets together, that's different to, saying, oh, we're one thing today and we're a different thing tomorrow, if you see what I mean. So I think the leadership tier is what we're describing when we talk about team. Mm-hmm. And on that layer, you want to be able to have quite a good grasp of, different technologies, because I guess what I'm saying is like, it might be AI is the flavor today. Last year it was metaverse. The year before, was it VR? Maybe like 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But the flavor of the month does change quite quickly in games. And so I think if you have quite a good grasp of the different varieties of tech, that's to your favor. And then you might bring in specific expertise to support whatever it is that is needed in that moment. Like mobile is quite tough right now. Should you be looking at different platforms, you know? And shifting with that, the times is quite important. Like I think that agility is what we value.
And you're thinking about, mentioning things like having someone with a kind of deeper experience in AI, or being able to have an awareness across, or familiarity with the kind of rapidly evolving kind of multifaceted industry. At the same time, I see we've got indies here, like smaller teams. I guess sort of how much sympathy or understanding is there? Like some, we all know some indie games have done extremely well and been very investable. How much sympathy or understanding is there that some of these teams might not have a head of HR and a team of 100 and a rich experience? Like, is there, I guess if I were in the audience listening to some of what you said and I was at a 4-person indie, I'd be thinking, how the hell are we going to do all that? Do investors understand the kind of low finesse?
I wouldn't recommend equity investors and indie game studios.
And do you just want to distinguish equity quickly?
Yes. So equity investment is when you as an investor, you're taking part of the company as equity in return for your investment. And it's different from, say, project finance, where you're taking a part of the game, like revenues, in return for your investment.
Right.
Okay. So I think that's, and then you've got debt as well, which is not so common in the games industry, but it's getting more and more.
Yeah, I think a lot of people use debt as part of a larger package. So, I think the thing with funding is that the idea that, and this definitely applies to indies, that you've got a game idea, you want to get the money and then be able to sit back and make the game. Unfortunately, that's pretty unlikely. The reality is that what you're probably going to have to do is piece together little bits of money. And I think you're probably right that equity is probably one of the lesser areas, depending on your aspiration.
Yeah, with equity, it's okay. So, sorry to interrupt.
No, go.
For most equity investment, it's really important to understand the model for most equity outfits, VCs, for example. VCs, VCs invest in companies at a very early stage, and it's extremely risky. 95%, more than like 98% of their investments are going to fail. But then the idea is that the 2% that are successful are super successful, and they pay for all the failures and then some. So they're really looking for moonshots. They're looking for hyper ambitious founders who have, the drive and the know-how to get to make their game, for example, the next big, like League of Legends or something along those lines. So yes, that typically doesn't describe your indie.
Right. But obviously you serve indies with a degree, and you mentioned the kind of putting things together. Yeah. Like, what are we talking about? Like, a combination of grants?
Yes, I think we're talking, grants are really good in the sense that they fill the gap where often private investors won't, right? That's generally where they're supposed to be. And they tend to fall into, broadly speaking, public money. UK Games Fund, I'm a huge fan. That's a really great program because it genuinely does the job of coming in really early. You've also got private stuff like Epic Mega Grant, right? And they have obviously strategic reasons for doing that. So the terms are really good. Then you've got project financing, obviously, which is, where a lot, so you want to make a game, you get money, they get money back from the revenue of that in return for it. And that's probably a lot more where a lot of indies sit, because if your focus is on making a game rather than building a big business, then that's probably much more suitable.
And publishers are kind of generally project finance, but with more services, and therefore take more revenue share.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely concur with you guys. I think what's really important as a indie studio is to establish your goal. Like, what are you actually aiming to become? And I think if you're really ambitious to kind of create $1 billion franchise, then obviously VC and venture is something that should be top of mind from the get-go. How are you going to position your studio so that you are investable, maybe not immediately, but in the next 12 months, 18-month horizon, and you should be taking steps towards angling for that investment, because it's very tough to get that, as you say, like that it's a very hit-driven approach. And so you really have to be, just as a data point, really interesting, about a year ago I was sat kind of in the audience where you guys all are sat, listening to a panel of VCs saying that they get about 5,000 applications and one of those would get an investment. And that's a 0.02%. I need a calculator. I think that's right. Chance of getting that investment. So if that is what you're angling for, then that's a great strategy for you. But if that's not really who you want to become, then there are many other options open to you in credit, including credit finance or crowdfunding and other sources of income that might be more suited. So I think that venture finance has been very much glorified and sort of become this kind of glamorized way of raising. Being able to put out a press release to say we've just raised like 10 million Series A or whatever is really cool. But does that really suit what you're trying to build is kind of where you need to start.
And I think another important thing to remember about equity funding is that the investors will want to have an exit eventually. So that means that either you're going to have to be happy with your company being acquired, or you're going to be happy to IPO your company, put your company onto public markets. And so that means if you're really into maintaining creative control, maybe the equity financing is not so much of an angle that you want to go through.
Yeah, I think you have to really it's true, once you get that VC backing, it's great. And that's a really exciting moment. But from that moment on, your company changes. And you really have to sort of start to pull out the stops around how you're going to hit certain KPIs, how you're going to hit certain milestones. And that's quite a different, if you're an indie starting out, that's quite a different sort of cultural shift as well.
Yeah.
And you have to be prepared for that. And I think it's a certain journey that you have to
I'm
be.
not sure if VC funding is that great, actually.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway, ladies and gentlemen. Off we go.
In the sense that, like I say, I agree with you in that, like, it really depends what your goals are. I mean,
I think
what I mean?
your point about it being glamorized is really key, because I think a lot of particularly in games, particularly when we talk about equity, we often think equity equals VC. There are angels, there are other types of investors equity investors who get involved, but also it's kind of, that's often where developers are focused, is VCs, because there's so many VCs and some high profile ones like LVP and stuff like that. But actually that is one of many types of funding. And the reality is it doesn't suit 99.9% of developers, and that's okay. And I think that it's really important to know that that's okay. That is one route for a company. You can have an incredible business that's a lifestyle business. You can have an incredible business that's small growth, that you focus on culture. And actually, one of the things that we always talk about with startups is like, what does success look like for you? And most companies I ask don't know the answer to that. So one thing that we always do is we sort of say, well, okay, think about answering that question in terms of commercially, what does success look like for you? Creatively, what does it look like for you? But also personally, because honestly, if you go down the VC route, your life is going to change. You
won't have a life.
I mean, I don't have kids, but I think having a business is probably a bit like having a kid, right? It's a big commitment. It's a big thing. And the most important thing is that you do what you want to do. And so do you want to have, a great small team with incredible culture who makes incredible art that makes enough money to make the next game? That's an incredible business. That's not a business that a VC wants, but that doesn't make it any less good. So I think understanding what success is to each of the founders, making sure that you're aligned, because actually my first business, that was something we learned. The founders had different, we were graduates, we didn't know, we had different aspirations. So I think it's really important to discuss that between the founders, but then to know that and to link that in with the types of funding you're going to get. And I think for most people, grants, project funding, maybe some angels who come in because it's something that, they see they can make money from, but not necessarily looking for the VC level. There's lots of different options. But it's what's right for
I'm sure you've got more questions there.
No, this is great.
Sorry,
you are expert. Like you're making it easy for me, but regardless of that, this is brilliant.
I don't want to tread on your toes.
No, people don't need to hear me talking.
But yeah, I think as well, culturally, absolutely. Who are you culturally, and who do you want to be, and how do you want to spend your time? Also, equally, how much do you want to dilute your business? And I think that we have a credit vehicle because our thesis is that you might not want to dilute and give away a share of your business from day one. You know, at the end of the day, everything has a cost if you're getting money in early on. And I think co-development, for example, is a great way to fund a great game that you're building on your own as your own IP. I actually, you know, I think traditionally VCs have probably shunned on that a little bit just because it diversifies your attention, and the argument being that you're not focused on building your own IP. And I think that's pretty valid as an argument. But, you know, bootstrapping and getting kind of revenue through the door and not diluting and not paying anything for that, that's a great way to kind of keep your cash flow healthy and carrying on. As a secondary option, kind of getting credit through the door and not diluting your business and kind of carrying on in that way is also a great alternative. So I think that the dilution point is a really big one, and everything has a price. So what I really encourage indies to do is to kind of crunch some numbers and kind of go, okay, we're going to take money now and that's what's right for us, fine. But what is that going to cost us in the next X number of months? You know, what is that real price? And if you really believe in your studio and you think that you're going to be 10x or 100x what you're worth now in 3 years' time, equity will be pretty expensive and some alternatives will be quite cheap comparatively. Hello, baby. Probably not enjoying this chat too much, but I think, yeah, that understanding of kind of, again, back to the glamorized point, you know, everything has a price point and everything has a cost. I think that's quite a good analogy. That said, I do think that, you know, venture funding is super helpful. And if you want to be like a unicorn and really sort of stretch it out to $1 billion type business, then that's a pretty valid route too. It's just that it's a pretty hard road.
Yeah. I just, sorry.
No, carry on again.
The debt point, the credit point. Like I think that there is a perception that debt is bad, I think, often. And I disagree very, very strongly, because it's not the answer to everything, but actually said it can actually be the cheapest form of money long term. And actually, you know, using debt as a vehicle alongside other funding is actually pretty fundamental to building a funding journey, I would say. So, you know, in most cases, you know, for example, right, you're going to raise 400K in project financing, right? You actually need 500. Well, the other 100K could come from a tax credit loan that you're going to repay later. So rather than giving away, I'm picking numbers here, 80% of the revenue of your game for 500, you only have to give away 70% for 400, and you pay a very small fee on the debt. So, you know, actually using debt as a vehicle alongside the rest of the funding can significantly reduce the overall cost of your money. And I think it's really important that, you know, we consider debt particularly alongside other funding, and in some cases actually instead of, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I'm just like really happy you said that. That makes my job easier. Yeah, we you know, as a kind of, as I say, credit plus equity, like the way we do our investment is really sort of, again, back to our thesis. We don't want to overly dilute founders. We think that debt can be a much more cost-effective way of keeping the business running. We're very holistic in our view around you're running a business. It doesn't mean that you have to have a hit game tomorrow. So that pressure is off. And that's kind of our approach. But I do agree that, and I do agree that I think if you're looking for equity funding, we might actually be a bridge towards that as well. So a combination, like you say, Ella, I think is pretty valid as well. And I speak more as a studio now, just kind of switching gears a bit, but we've definitely leveraged all kinds of funding as a studio, like no sort of, you know, cobwebs as such, but, you know, we haven't necessarily gone for the big Series C approach. We've gone for more what was realistic for our business as a studio. And from a studio standpoint, we've leveraged a whole bunch of different funding options. And I think that debt has been pretty well received from even equity funders who think that it's pretty healthy because we're not diluting our existing investors too heavily. And so that can also be spun as a positive. In a way. So I do think that a hybrid is definitely kind of a sound business approach and not something to be discarded, right? I think it's definitely kind of a realistic approach to it.
How do you secure the debt? You know, when it comes to game studio?
As Factor Tech. Yeah. So we would look at, I mean, VGTR is kind of an obvious approach, but we also that brings us to what stage you need to be at, I guess. But we do look at IP and kind of the value that an intrinsic value that an IP might have.
More like venture debt.
Yeah, exactly. So we will like look at what's there if everything else fails, you know. But that's sort of a blanket kind of a safety net, if you may. And usually we like to see some sort of like tangible security, whether it's VGTR or R&D or revenue, something that you can kind of point to, whether it's, you know, revenue contracts or VGTR kind of loans coming back to you, etc. So it's good to have some form of tangible security, but over and above that, we will look at the IP. So yeah, I think that if you're looking at financing, then from our perspective, it's helpful to have some sort of an MVP or something that you can showcase as a tangible asset.
Yeah, so we've done some like venture debt funding, and you know that's essentially secured against IP and future revenues, right? So that is not the easiest type of debt to get because it is high risk, but that's because we've done that as part of a larger package of other funding.
Right.
And actually, in some cases, having somebody who's trusted you with debt can actually be quite a good thing to be able to talk about to investors, because if you've actually be able to demonstrate to sufficient level to a debt financer that you are a business that's worth taking a risk on, that actually is quite a good thing to be able to talk about. So it can actually be a real positive. The other thing I would say is, like, for me, factoring, user acquisition factoring, which I know if anyone knows what that is often thought about mobile games, right? So the idea that on a mobile game, you've got to spend a lot of money on marketing. So therefore, financiers will come in, they'll do one of two things. They'll either look at the revenues that you've got on the App Store, but you're not going to get paid for like 60 days, and they'll give it to you in advance and then get it back, right? That's the lower risk version. The other one is they look at the data of the game and forecast what you're going to make and then loan it to you. And it's like a snowball, so it's like a monthly rolling thing, right? I'm really interested in why aren't more games that are products doing that? The first one mainly, because you've got money coming in from Steam, Sony, whatever, right? Why aren't you factoring that? So rather than getting £1 million of where say £500,000 is your production budget, £500,000 your marketing budget, why don't you get 600k? So you've got 500, you've got your production funding and 100k to do that first bit of marketing. And then why not factor the other 400? So you're giving away way less revenue. I think there's a lot, for me, that space is really interesting because it's super cheap money compared to everything else. And I think that it's being used extensively in like games as a service. But I'm really interested to see if there's other ways that we can use that more across other games.
Do you feel like IDFA privacy changes have maybe made it less viable?
I think that...
Should we just give a quick primer of the whole...
Yes, go. Sorry, I realise you haven't asked a question for ages.
Honestly, no one's come here to see me, and I'm absolutely fine with that. I've got a few more questions that we could ask, but honestly, it's not a problem.
God, you explain.
But just to IDFA, right, was the shift in responsibility around how we take information
so it is
mobile users.
Yeah, that's right. So all these it makes it a lot harder to attribute track users, which means it's much more expensive to track and it's less effective, right?
Yeah. So my opinion is that mobile now needs to learn from PC, because you cannot purely do it based on numbers and data. So you have to think about organic, you have to think about community to be able to boost it, because it's too expensive on its own.
Right.
That's my thinking.
Yeah, the PC marketing has always been really tricky to quantify. That's a nice thing about mobile marketing. It's just so super easy.
Yeah, and it's
all
not
data driven.
It is, but I think it's like you've got to do that. But
this is why mobile investing in mobile games is gone right downhill.
Yeah,
because it's just a lot harder to see whether it can scale effectively. Yeah,
I'll tell you what, I will have a go at being assertive host, and just because we're sort of moving on to honestly, mate, you guys are full of this amazing expertise, and I'm not investing or funding, but you should be speaking more than me. But we're kind of talking about there's all these different routes. Very quickly, I love your mention of UK Games Fund, because I was thinking like getting people started. I had to double check I wasn't kind of losing track of things, but some now kind of cherished and significant employers like Tag Games, Future Lab, a huge mobile companies, games I love, who I can't remember, but that's launched some huge companies, right, with a modest amount. But whether we're talking indies looking at options like that, or mid-size and AAA going to proper kind of, VCs and so on, like the discussion has almost been like, what should we do? What should we get right? But at the same time, what should people be looking out for? What are the red flags? Like, I guess we don't want to be entirely subservient to investors and financiers, right? So what are the things to keep an eye out for to protect your studio or project or team?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great question. The red flags will be different depending on what strategy you're going for as a studio. Are you eyeing out VC funding, in which case the term sheet, obviously, I think at that point you would have hopefully some resource to review the terms. And I think that the fine print is really important, and not getting caught up in the moment of like, oh, we really need funding, we really need this cash. And, I think it's quite easy to lose sight of the fine print, whether it's venture funding or whether it's even debt. What are the terms, and how, again, applying the lens of every bit of money that we get has a cost to it in return, and really kind of crunching those numbers and understanding what that return looks like. How much are you going to have to fork out if your game or your business does grow by 150x as a VC might expect? Like the value of what you'd be giving away would be quite significant. Even with a debt deal, what are the specific terms around interest and other kind of clauses around early exits, any penalties around that, or any setup fees, and kind of really looking at the financial kind of red flags, I guess, and really kind of taking the time to review those, I think are really important. But also just from a cultural standpoint, are you bringing on board an investor that understands the gaming landscape? If you're just taking the cash, then I think that's fine. But I also think that can be quite challenging down the line, where, it becomes really tough in the gaming context. And if it were a gaming investor, they might actually understand the challenges of that particular market in that moment, and why mobile is so tough right now, for example, versus other platforms, and not kind of go, oh, we're really nervous, we want our money back, or, suddenly kind of getting cold feet. And I think that it's kind of a tough one, because, should you be therefore getting like smart money? That's pretty hard to get as well. And it is a balancing game, but know that if you're taking on board just the cash with no expertise, that will come potentially with some heartache if they're not prepared to kind of weather the storm with you. So, it's kind of give and take, but certainly, yeah, it can get quite hairy.
Yeah, I would say that, ultimately you're going to be working with these people for a long time, right? Whether even project financing or equity, it's going to be probably years or longer, right? So we have a policy internally, which is don't work with arseholes. And I would say like that's a good starting point. So if you don't feel like these are people you want to work with, don't work with them. And I think I have taken money where I've ignored that and I've regretted it.
Yeah, you can't do good business with bad people.
No, you can't. And, you're getting into bed with the devil, right? It's just, you will come to regret it. So whilst it's really difficult, because sometimes you just need money and sometimes you will have to do deals you don't want to do, try and avoid it at all costs. It's a two-way relationship. Like, yes, okay, you need money, and you often feel like as a developer, like being there myself, you're the one that needs something, but actually they need something too. And, as a publisher, there's pressure on us to sign games. I need to sign games. I have investors who, so I have other things that I need. So it needs to be a two-way relationship. And I think you've got to have the same vision and understanding. And, and then I would say the other thing is making sure that, so one of the things I hate is like personal guarantees, which I understand in some cases there are reasons to do it. But actually, if you're going to take someone into your business who's going to be a partner, making sure that they're actually in it for the right reasons. So if they are just removing all of their risk or as much, then that might tell you something about their faith in your business and their commitment to it. So I'm not saying blanket don't do things like personal guarantees, but I think if they want a huge amount of equity that is disproportionate, if they want personal guarantees, they're not necessarily a hard no, but they are hang on a minute, let's have a think about this.
Yeah, I think the best partnerships are relationship led. And, we really, as a fund, we really pride ourselves in kind of helping out early stage, even when things don't look super rosy, in the hope that when you grow up, we grow up with you. And I think that's a good philosophy. And like you say, if it's just about that quick deal and the quick return, then that feels like a red flag. Yeah. It feels a bit too, feels a bit too rushed.
One more thing, because we might actually have to throw it open to the audience fairly soon, but I wanted to, and I will put this to you first, Ella, just because we talked about it briefly before, is that like kind of confidence around asserting what you're offering and like communicating that to say it's a bit naff to say, but X factor of your game or team or company. Like, who's the how do you identify that? Like, who's the onus on there? This is a question to all of you, but because Ella was.
Oh yes, I was
enthusing about it earlier.
Slightly earlier. So I was talking about the fact that often as a developer, you pitch something to an investor or a publisher, and they sort of say, "Well, that's great, but can come back when you've got to this point, or whatever." And a lot of the time, as a developer, I literally was there, and now I see the other side of it. I'm like, oh, but you kind of like, well, what is it you want to see? And you're like, just tell me what you want to see in your build, right? And as a developer, you're like, fuck's sake, just tell me. But there's a reason they don't tell you, and that's because if you don't know what is the hook in your game, then that's a problem, right? So publishers, investors, they're an audience. Make a marketing plan if you need to, like you would for an audience, because that's essentially what they are, right? What is it about your game that's going to hook them? It probably is the same thing that will hook the audience, your mainstream audience, but you need to have that same mentality. So from your pitch deck, to the art in the pitch deck, to the build that you put together, it needs to be something that, our job isn't to work out what is good about your game. Our job is to see something that we know an audience is going to like and be like, oh yeah, we get it. And we see that the developer gets it. Because actually the biggest challenge is you've got a game design that you want to make, great. You've hopefully done some market and audience research. Actually, the biggest gap that I see often is that making those two fit together. So it's like, I've got a game that I wanted to make, I've got a market and audience, but it's very easy to find a market and audience that fit because you want to make a case for it, versus actually showing me, I really know this audience, I am making it for them, and my game design, everything I think about, everything I do is about that audience. And I would say to early stage developers, like, whilst it's only you that thinks your game is good, you're going to be at a disadvantage to everyone else, right? Come to an investor, a publisher, with evidence that somebody else thinks your game is good. I think that's the rant over.
Yeah, I think right. To that, just to expand on that, if your process, and I do think that pitches that stand out, let's put it this way, pitches that stand out to us as an investor is like the language matches our investor language. What is it that's going to hit an audience? What is it that's going to hit a return? That's what ultimately, as crude as that sounds, that is the investor language. So I think as an indie, there are many, many benefits to being an indie versus a AAA. Definitely accentuate those and be yourself. But what you're doing is you're twisting that and kind of using the right language to talk to an investor. And I think that's kind of where you're kind of talking about an audience and a market. And that's really key. And so pitches that can really craft a story around what is the opportunity in a market to really capitalize on a certain market, those pitches stand out. I would say that maybe 85% of pitches that we see coming through our desk are about how cool this game is and how many different shots of different in-game, angles we can get in the shot. And that's the sort of, that dominates the deck. If there are some more interesting analytics around how we're actually going to capitalize on an audience, then that's kind of it stands out as a plus. And so I would say that don't compromise on being an indie, because that is who you are, and definitely accentuate the benefits of being an indie versus a massive kind of corporate, but speak the right language that will resonate, because ultimately at the end of the day everybody wants to be understood, right? So as investors we kind of want to be understood that ultimately we're putting down money for a return, and if you're able to talk to that, I think you're winning. I think that's the sort of attitude that helps.
I think it's quite hard for indies to understand what makes a investor think that a game will be, how do you do that? How is it possible for a tiny 4-person, 2-person indie team to do that kind of intensive market analysis and prove or demonstrate that give the evidence that there is some opportunity?
Well, yeah.
It doesn't have to be a super high cost game. I think what would be, just hypothetically, but even if it isn't a super high cost AAA game, we've made a really simple low cost game, but we know that there's a huge community on Facebook or some other Reddit channel, whatever it is. They're waiting for an experience like this, and that's the audience we want to target. I think that is more outward looking than inward looking. And I guess for us anyway, the point is more about, are you able to look outside of your expertise and into the market? And are you able to identify an existing market that wants something? Can you target that? And can you give them something that really hits their needs? So, it doesn't need to be like a massive high cost thing. It's almost like saying, we see an unmet audience here, we want to really like service them. And that's quite language wise. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it's the right kind of language.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there was that need for precision. Did you want to?
I was just thinking, I think a strategy that I'm seeing that works for some indie game studios that want to find a publisher, want to find project finance and so much the equity side, but doing that kind of market validation really early can be super useful, and in getting your the concepts of your game out there, like starting off with a community, almost just proving that there is market demand from the get before you even really get fully into game production, and then
I would. So I've seen some great examples of that. I mean, things that you're saying about things that matter for us, a Discord community that's active, people are engaged in it long term, even if there's a small number of them, right? So talking about it. Wish list numbers are an obvious one. I mean, questions over, but it's still useful, all that. So there are some stuff like that. Also, before you start making your game, make a 30-second trailer with some, a mock-up, fake the game, right? Whatever, gameplay. Spend 150 quid on Facebook for 3 days, see how many people click it. Like, if it's less than £1.50, you're doing good. Right. Do 2 different art styles or 2 different game concepts. Spend 300 quid. See which ones, it matters even if it's a product, because ultimately you need to make more than you spend on marketing. And for 150 quid, you can get some data that an investor will be like, not only, that's an interesting starting point, it's very early, it's very small, it's not like this is going to be a success, but also it shows that you're actually aware and you care about your audience.
I think
testing, do you usually have just go for any kind of audience, or do you make sure that it's selected?
So I mean, obviously targeting, the better you can get at targeting, the more useful. But ultimately, again, you probably know roughly, you can target on Facebook by other games and other things, right? So I think obviously there are people who are really good at this. I'm not one of them. My business partner is. But even if you're not, there is a basic level I think you can do that will get you some interesting data.
I have experimented with this, and it is the Facebook backend is.
Oh yeah, no, it gives me a headache. Yes. So there are Udemy courses that can tell you.
Right. Really? Okay. Wow.
We're running out of time. I'm being friendly waved at. So guess what? I've got some questions left over if none of you have questions, but I can already see some arms going up. I can only really see a silhouette, but a pink cap over there, a microphone will. You might have that cap. It's just going to compliment it.
You have all the caps.
I don't want that cap.
I'm
now.
terrible at Facebook.
Right. My outfit.
I'll let you bid on it. So I have a lot of questions. I'll just choose to pick one. A is safe agreements, I think, in game funding. So an agreement for future equity from angel investors.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yes, sorry. Could you say
safe agreements?
Yeah.
Or convertible notes, or
okay.
And is rev share and equity raising, is it a conflict of interest there, or is rev share given as a form of dividend in this case, or is rev share only in a publisher relationship kind of versus
To the point about safes, yes, we do use safes. There are also this is a bit too much information, but there are some UK versions of that. There's one called Seed Fast, which basically, if you're raising money using sort of seed enterprise investment scheme tax incentives, SAFE does not comply. So in the UK, they have actually created a version of SAFE that helps you with that. So if you're looking at that, there are some UK specific ones. What was the second question?
I wonder if I picked this up in the right way, but you were saying kind of project finance versus equity and whether there's a conflict there. Is that what you said?
Because you mentioned revenue share as in the same sentence before as equity raising. Yeah. And I wasn't sure
quite
if
different.
This is,
in structure.
Yeah, different structure, right? Yeah.
I would say that you're obviously, you do a specific kind of investment, so you might have a different view. I think in our experience, and this is more as a studio, having a publisher it is a great kind of approach, and that's rev share led usually because it's project based. It's not about your company or your studio. You're not looking at the business as a holistic entity. You're looking more about that particular game. So you could be a game studio working on multiple different games, but you're getting a deal on a particular game, and I think that works great. When it comes to getting equity investment, that may be a contentious point. Oh, you already have a publisher for this or that game, and therefore there's a bit of an overlap in terms of how it is perceived. So I would say, I'm not saying it's either or, but it's certainly something to consider. As far as credit and like advanced lending is concerned, no problem whatsoever. You could be lending on a project and there could be a publisher involved. I don't really see a conflict there. So it sort of depends on the combination of, vehicle, investment type that's going in, you know what I mean? So some are like chalk and cheese and some are like fine.
I was about to, because one more hand went out, so we'll quickly squeeze in another question, but I literally just got this gesture from the people in control. So I think we're going to end it there. It's a shame the baby's left. I wanted to give a real shout out because juggling work and parenting is bloody hard, and it's wicked that we're in an industry and conference where it's more common that people feel cool doing that. Sorry you're not still here, baby. More importantly, thank you so much to our brilliant guests. I think we could have done about 3 hours, but so much expertise. Thanks to you lot. We're done.